Friends, support for Authentic South comes from listeners like you. Consider making a donation. Anything is appreciated. Just go to AuthenticSouth.com. Well, go ahead.
To understand the South, you have to understand the story. If you ask a Southerner a question, unlike, say, perhaps in the North, where you would get facts and figures, how long is it from Decatur, Georgia, to Birmingham, Alabama, you would probably get an answer like it's 150 miles. But ask a Southerner, and numbers will not be mentioned. Well, my uncle did this trip once, and his car broke down just across the state line, and that's where we had the most amazing experience, and that may run for an hour. And you've heard incredible stories, but you still don't know the mileage. But it doesn't matter, because embedded in the story is this whole journey. And you don't even have to make the trip. You've already made it in an imaginary way. But the story for the South, and I really think for all people, the story is who we are.
I'm Tanner Latham, and this is Authentic South. It's a storytelling podcast that explores Southern culture through food, art, music, the land, characters, and a wealth of brilliant storytellers. And one of the best, one of the standard setters, is folklorist Bill Ferris. Bill is a history professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the senior associate director of the school's Center for the Study of the American South. He co-edited the Pulitzer-nominated Encyclopedia of Southern Culture. He also served as chairman of the National Endowment of the Humanities under President Clinton. For the past 40 years, Bill has documented the South and Southerners in print and with his photography and films. His latest book, The Storied South, in many ways is a culmination of those decades of work. It's a collection of interviews with some of the South's and our country's most iconic writers, musicians, historians, photographers, and artists. Most of them are Southern: Robert Penn Warren, Alice Walker, Alex Haley, Eudora Welty. But some, like Pete Seeger, were from elsewhere, yet were greatly influenced by this region.
I spent my life as a folklorist recording blues singers, mule traders, storytellers, quilt makers. And this book crosses the tracks to those worlds who, like I, wrote about what we would think of as the folk, the indigenous voices of the South. They adapted them as writers, they painted them, they photographed them, they sang about them, and they wrote about them as scholars. And you have these two powerful, dynamic worlds in the South of this rich folk voice and voices. And you have this equally amazing tradition of literature and music and art that feeds off that wellspring of culture. And to me, that's the dynamic I try to understand in my classes. Is the best way to understand William Faulkner and Richard Wright, Eudora Welty, Robert Penn Warren, is to listen to the stories that shaped their fiction. And to my amazement in this book, the painters have the same relationships to Faulkner and to Welty, whom they idolized, and Alice Walker, and also to the folk voices and what Eudora calls a sense of place. the powerful, grounded experience that Southerners have, and it's a love-hate experience. It's not simply one of adoration and sheer admiration for a place. It's in many ways a place that people flee. Alice Walker lives not in Georgia, her home state, but in Berkeley, California. So you have expatriate Southerners, but they carry those places with them. And in California, Alice wrote The Color Purple, which is set in the Deep South, and Georgia certainly shaped deeply that world. Every one of these voices tells a good story, and some of them are not Southern, like Pete Seeger and his father Charles Seeger, John Dollard, Walker Evans. They come from outside the South, but their lives were forever changed by the South. Walker Evans was forever known for his photography in Hale County, Alabama, that he did with James Agee. And Pete Seeger's life was forever changed by his trips to North Carolina, where he first heard banjo picking, and where later in Tennessee he helped create the civil rights anthem, We Shall Overcome. So all of these figures were embraced and forever defined by the American South. And that's what the storied South is about. It's a place that is powerful in its magnetism. It has a magnetic power that draws you in, and what really draws you and changes you are the stories, whether you've heard them from childhood or you hear them for the first time as a teenager or someone who is an adult who comes down and realizes this is a different place, and how can I understand it? You understand it by listening to stories.
In the book, each interview is framed as a dramatic monologue, so you're only reading what the subject says. Your questions are not part of the stories that you're telling here, the passages that you're telling here. But I am curious about where your voice is in this book.
Well, my story is throughout it. I acknowledge who I am in the introduction, but my real fingerprints are on those photographs. When you see Charles Seeger looking face tight against the lens in that portrait, and others like him, they're looking at me, and they are reflecting my presence in their presence. Their voices are reflecting not just my questions, but my presence, sympathetic, probing, excited, patient, whatever I felt was required to move the interview forward, I was doing. In some cases, I was exhausted. With Charles Seeger, the interview went for 3 to 4 hours. And at the end of it, I was having trouble focusing and maintaining the kind of intensity that I try to maintain in an interview. But it's like a painting on a wall, and you ask, where's the artist? He's not there, or she's not there. But they are there in the image that's been created. The handiwork of producing the book is my handiwork. It's my way of seeing these people and trying to touch their soul. I see them as, for me, the soul of the South and the soul of who I am. For better or worse, that's where I found my sort of signpost along the way.
If I was someone from a foreign country or from another planet, and I had discovered that you could help me understand what the South is, or that you could help me to define the South, how would you define the South for me?
Well, I would take you out in a field and let you smell the air, and I would dig in the dirt, put it in a jar, and let you look at the color of it and feel it, smell it, and get a sense of that place at that moment. Or take you to the Mississippi River and let you put your hand in that water and look across it at the birds flying and the large limbs being moved at 5 miles an hour in its turbulent waters, to get a sense of both the beautiful and the frightening places that are part of this place we call the South. And then I would take you to a small restaurant out in the country where we would get a plate lunch, fresh tomatoes, slaw, fried okra, iced tea with sweetened tea, whether you wanted it or not, it's sweetened, with lemon, and some cake or pie for dessert. And that would be the taste of the South. And then I would take you to an auction barn to hear livestock being auctioned with the powerful sound of the auctioneer, and to go behind in the stables where the cattle and horses and mules are moving, to talk with the farmers back there who would be gathered in a circle and talking about the weather and the price of livestock and their families and who's been born and died, and to give you a sense of the fabric of black and white worlds that are deeply bound by the daily life that auction is part of. So there would be a smell, a feel, a taste, and last but not least, the sounds of stories being told in ways that are truly beautiful and simple and clear, but profoundly important.
Bill, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Well, Tanner, you're a special friend, and I'm a big fan of all you're doing, and I look forward to following your journey, which is going to have some very important steps along the way. You're another James Agee setting out, exploring the South, and there's a difference between those who explore the South who are born here and those who come from outside it, and the kind of passion that Southerners have, this love-hate relationship that Faulkner describes in his fiction, is something that I know exists in you, and you will be faithful and true to the South and being honest and clear and articulate about it.
Bill Ferris's book, The Storied South, is out now and includes a CD and DVD with audio and film from his original interviews. In our conversation, Bill and I talked extensively about his friendship with famed Mississippi writer Eudora Welty.
Eudora I knew from the time I was a child, not well, but when I was a very young child, she and several of her friends came to the farm where I grew up to do sketches, watercolors, and picnic. And I had no idea who they were, but after they left, my mother said, now one of those people is a famous writer that one day you'll know.
We'll hear more about that in the next episode of the show. To see some of Bill's photography and to hear other episodes, click on over to AuthenticSouth.com. You can also hear us at WFAE.org, on iTunes, on Stitcher Radio, and on SoundCloud. As always, the theme music is by Chris Hoke and Brett Eastep. The opening song was called Remember You Used to Love Me by the band Warjacket. Check out more of their music at warjacket.com. Until we go south again, thanks for listening.